In this video, we're serving up 13 iconic foods that fueled the frontier. 1. Beans and salt pork. Picture this. A group of weary cowboys huddled around a crackling campfire, the smell of something savory wafting from a cast-iron pot. What's bubbling away in there? It's the ultimate cowboy comfort food, beans and salt pork. This simple dish was more than just grub. It was the fuel that kept cowboys going through long days and harsh conditions on the trail. Now, you might be thinking, beans? Really? But hold your horses. These humble legumes packed a powerful punch. Beans were loaded with protein and fiber, while salt pork provided much-needed fat and flavor. Plus, both ingredients were easy to transport and lasted for ages without spoiling. Talk about a trail-ready meal. But cowboys weren't content with just plain old beans and pork. They'd toss in whatever they could scrounge up along the way. Wild onions, prairie herbs, even the occasional rattlesnake. Nothing was off limits when it came to sprucing up their daily pot of beans. This resourcefulness turned a basic staple into an ever-changing culinary adventure. 2. Biscuits and Gravy. Ever wondered what could fuel a cowboy before a long day of wrangling cattle? Picture this. The smell of fresh biscuits wafting through the air as the sun peeks over the horizon. Biscuits and gravy wasn't just a meal. It was a morning ritual that brought the crew together, setting the tone for the day ahead. Wagon cooks became masters of the Dutch oven, using hot coals to create biscuits with a perfect crispy exterior. And the gravy? That's where the real magic happened. These frontier chefs were wizards at using every bit of available fat, often from bacon or salt pork, to whip up a flavorful base that would make your mouth water. But here's where it gets interesting. Different regions put their own spin on this classic. Some areas favored a peppery kick, while others threw in a splash of coffee for a unique twist called red-eye gravy. Talk about a morning pick-me-up. Cowboys often enjoyed their meal sopping style, soaking up every last drop of gravy with their biscuits. It wasn't just about filling their bellies. It was a way to build camaraderie and make sure nothing went to waste. 3. Beef jerky. Ever wondered what kept cowboys going during those long cattle drives when there was no time to stop for a meal? Enter beef jerky, the protein-packed pocket fuel that was more than just a snack. This dried meat wasn't just tasty, it was a genuine lifesaver on the frontier. Making jerky was an art form perfected by necessity. Cowboys would slice meat thin, season it with salt, and let it dry in the sun or over a low fire. This process was crucial in the days before refrigeration, allowing meat to last for months without spoiling. Compared to the jerky we munch on today, the Wild West version was much drier, saltier, and more brittle. Perfect for those long rides across the prairie. 4. Johnny cakes. Ever wondered what a cowboy could whip up for breakfast when the sun's barely peeking over the horizon and the herd's already on the move? Enter Johnny cakes, the frontier's answer to fast food. These simple corn pancakes weren't just a Native American staple. They became a cowboy's secret weapon against hunger on the trail. Picture this. With just a handful of cornmeal, a splash of water, and a pinch of salt, cowboys could rustle up a filling meal in no time. Cooked on a hot griddle or in a trusty frying pan, Johnny cakes were the perfect solution for those mornings when every minute counted. Some cowboys even got fancy, adding a touch of milk or a sprinkle of sugar for extra flavor. But Johnny cakes weren't just for cowboys. These versatile cakes fueled pioneers, soldiers, and travelers as they pushed across the expanding nation. They could be eaten plain, drizzled with syrup, or even served alongside savory dishes. Talk about adaptable. Sourdough bread. Ever wondered how cowboys managed to enjoy fresh bread weeks into a cattle drive? The secret was sourdough. This wasn't just any bread. It was a living legacy passed from wagon to wagon, connecting pioneers across the American West. The science behind sourdough is pretty amazing. Wild yeast and bacteria from the environment work their magic on flour and water, creating a leavening agent that can last forever if you treat it right. Cowboys and wagon cooks became masters at keeping their sourdough starters alive, even in the toughest conditions. They'd mix up simple ingredients like flour, water, and salt, then bake the bread in Dutch ovens over an open fire. Talk about resourceful. Some of these starters became legendary, like the famous Mother Dough that traveled with pioneers across the country. Can you believe some families are still using that same starter today? 6. Chuck Wagon Stew. After a long day in the saddle, imagine the relief of seeing smoke rising from the chuck wagon. As you approach, a tantalizing aroma wafts from a massive pot. What's bubbling away in there? It's chuck wagon stew, and let me tell you, it's not just any old meal. This hearty concoction was a daily adventure in frontier cooking. Chuck wagon cooks were like culinary magicians, whipping up delicious meals from whatever they could get their hands on. Tough cuts of beef, throw them in. Pinto beans and potatoes, you bet. But here's where it gets really interesting. These resourceful cooks would toss in wild onions, prairie herbs, and even game meat like rabbit or bison when they were lucky enough to find them. 7. Cornbread. The stew's simmering away, but something's missing. What could round out this cowboy feast? Enter cornbread, the golden side dish that wasn't just a sidekick, it was a star in its own right. This crispy, crumbly delight was a crucial part of the cowboy diet, capable of standing tall on its own. Now, you might be wondering why cornbread was such a big deal. Well, it turns out that cornbread was a whole lot easier to whip up than wheat bread. Cowboys could mix up a batch with just a few simple ingredients and bake it right in their trusty Dutch ovens. Plus, corn was growing like crazy all over the West, making it the perfect ingredient for frontier cooks. But here's where it gets really interesting. Cornbread wasn't the same everywhere you went. Up north, they liked their cornbread with a touch of sweetness, while down south, savory was the name of the game. Some cowboys even got creative, tossing in herbs or leftover bits of meat to spice things up. Talk about making the most of what you've got. Buffalo or game meat. Ever wondered what cowboys ate when they couldn't touch the cattle they were herding? Well, hold on to your hats because we're about to reveal the wild side of cowboy cuisine. When supplies ran low, these rugged frontiersmen turned to nature's bounty, buffalo and game meat. And let me tell you, this wasn't just a last resort. Many cowboys actually preferred these wild meats for their rich flavors and nutritional punch. Imagine sinking your teeth into a juicy buffalo steak. Did you know that buffalo meat is about 30% lower in fat than beef? It's true. Cowboys loved it not just for its taste, but for the energy it gave them on long rides. But it wasn't all about buffalo. These resourceful fellas hunted everything from deer to rabbits, using techniques they learned from Native American tribes. 9. Salted fish. Miles from the nearest ocean, the last thing you'd expect on a cowboy's plate is fish. But hold your horses. Salted fish wasn't just a coastal delicacy. It was a protein-packed powerhouse that found its way to the landlocked West. Can you believe it? Cowboys chowing down on cod and herring alongside their beans and beef. Now, you might be wondering how fish managed to survive the long journey without spoiling. Here's the secret: salt, and lots of it. Coastal fishermen coated their catch in salt, drawing out moisture and keeping those pesky bacteria at bay. This clever trick meant fish could last for months without refrigeration, perfect for long cattle drives. 10. Coffee. As the first light of dawn breaks over the prairie, what's the one thing every cowboy's itching to get their hands on? You guessed it, a steaming cup of coffee. But hold on to your hats, because this wasn't just any old beverage. Coffee was the lifeblood of the cattle drive, keeping cowboys alert and ready for those long days in the saddle. Now, you might be wondering how these rough-and-tumble cowboys brewed their liquid gold. Picture this: a simple pot over an open fire, filled with water and ground coffee beans. It wasn't fancy, but it got the job done quick and easy. And let me tell you, that first sip of the day was worth its weight in gold. But coffee wasn't just about staying awake. It became a social ritual, bringing cowboys together around the campfire to swap stories and build friendships. Can you imagine the bonds formed over those shared cups? It's no wonder coffee became a symbol of hospitality and camaraderie in the rugged West. 11. Hardtack. Ever wondered what food could outlast even the toughest cowboy on those long, grueling cattle drives? Enter hardtack, the indestructible ration that was more than just a last resort. It was a frontier staple. This simple biscuit was made from just flour, water, and sometimes salt, baked at a low temperature for hours until it was rock hard. Why so tough? Because hardtack could last for months, even years, without spoiling. Talk about a cowboy's best friend. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds about as tasty as eating a saddle. And you'd be right. Cowboys had to get creative to make hardtack more palatable. Some would soak it in coffee to soften it up, while others crumbled it into stews for a bit of extra substance. We've even heard tales of cowboys trying to fry it or sprinkling it with whatever spices they could scrounge up. Imagine trying to jazz up a brick and you've got the idea. 12. Fry bread. Ever wondered what happened when cowboys and Native Americans crossed paths on the frontier? Well, let me tell you about a tasty little discovery that changed everything. Fry bread. This simple yet delicious treat wasn't just another Native American dish. It became a bridge between cultures in the Wild West. Now, you might think fry bread's been around forever, but it actually has a pretty surprising origin. When Native Americans were forced onto reservations, they had to get creative with the limited government rations they received. Using just flour and lard, they whipped up this crispy, chewy bread that could be eaten on its own or used to soak up stews and soups. As cowboys and settlers encountered this hearty bread, it quickly spread beyond Native American communities. People started adding their own twists, throwing in local ingredients and cooking it up in different ways. Some drizzled it with honey for a sweet treat, while others topped it with savory fixings. 13. Prairie Oysters. Roundup time on the ranch, and you won't believe what's on the menu. Ever heard of prairie oysters? Well, hold on to your hats because these aren't seafood at all. They're a cowboy rite of passage that might make your stomach turn. So, what are prairie oysters really? Brace yourself. They're bull testicles. That's right, nothing went to waste on the frontier, including these unusual delicacies. Cowboys would remove the testicles, soak them in water, then bread and fry them up. Talk about making the most of every part of the animal. Now, you might think everyone would run for the hills when these were served, but you'd be surprised. Some cowboys couldn't get enough of them, claiming they were an elixir of vitality. Others, well, let's just say their faces turned as green as the prairie grass.